A small, seemingly innocent wine box, but it holds a terrifying power that surpasses anything most people can imagine. No one really knows how long this box has existed, but the story began in the early 2000s when a woman named Haviva, an antique collector, found it at a flea market in Spain. The box was sealed in a strange way, with marks of age and time. At that moment, no one knew that this box contained something far more horrifying than anyone could imagine: a vengeful spirit. When the woman opened the box, all she found was an old bottle of wine, a few random trinkets like a hair comb, a small pocket watch that had stopped working, and a small piece of paper with strange Hebrew writing. But as soon as she touched the box, a cold wind suddenly swept through the room. Strangely enough, after bringing the box home, she began experiencing bizarre occurrences that she couldn't explain. The box would emit a foul smell every morning. Dark shadows seemed to move around the corners of the room, and strange noises kept her awake for weeks. However, things took a truly terrifying turn when she realized the box wasn't just bringing strange events into her life. It contained an evil spirit. She began to lose control of her own mind as nightmarish visions plagued her, and horrifying whispers haunted her in the dark. Each time she opened the box, more bizarre occurrences unfolded. Cold winds would sweep through her home, shadows would shift in the corners of the room, and on one occasion, she saw objects around her move on their own. From that point on, the story of the Dybbuk Box began to spread. A man named Kevin Mannis, who owned an antique shop, heard about the box and decided to purchase it. Initially, he didn't think much of it, assuming it was just an old trinket, but after receiving it, he started noticing strange changes in himself. Mannis began experiencing recurring nightmares about an ugly woman, her hideous face filled with hate, staring at him from the shadows. His body felt heavy and exhausted, as if someone was watching him constantly. After some time, Mannis decided to sell the box to rid himself of it, but the horrors didn't stop there. When the new owner of the box began experiencing similar phenomena, a terrifying story had officially begun. Each person who owned the box began encountering terrifying events, relentless nightmares, physical deterioration, and a constant feeling of being followed. No one could keep the box for long without it affecting their mental and physical health. Things took a darker turn when the box was sold to another man, and he began documenting his strange experiences on an online forum. He described being surrounded by dark shadows, hearing whispers coming from the box, and seeing strange lights in his house late at night. Objects in his home would shatter for no reason, and inexplicable events seemed to happen on a regular basis. In 2004, the story of the Dybbuk Box continued to attract public attention, as people started noticing eerie connections between the box and the terrifying events that followed it. Every person who had owned the box had suffered tragic events beyond their comprehension, and one of the last people to sell it said they could feel the presence of an evil spirit trying to escape from the box. But no one truly knew who this spirit was or why it was imprisoned in the box. Some believed it was the spirit of a Jewish woman who had died in a concentration camp during World War II. Others believed that the box had been cursed by a Jewish sorcerer in the past, who had used it to imprison a malicious spirit. One thing is certain: the Dybbuk Box is not just an antique. It is a gateway to nightmares. A small object, yet it holds an unimaginable supernatural power that no one dares to touch. Anyone who has opened this box has not returned the same, and the story continues to haunt anyone who dares to delve into its mysteries. The Dybbuk Box story remains unsolved. Is it an elaborate hoax? Or is there truly a supernatural entity trapped inside it? One thing is certain: the Dybbuk Box is not something you want in your home, because no one knows what it may bring, except that it will never be something good. Sarah always felt like something was off in her small apartment. She had lived there for over a year, but every night, an unsettling sensation of being watched made her shiver. At first, she dismissed it as mere imagination, but soon, strange occurrences became more frequent. Every night, as she lay in bed, the dim glow of her nightlight cast long, shifting shadows on the walls. But sometimes, there were shadows that didn't move when she blinked. They stood still, unmoving, yet she could feel their gaze piercing through her. One night, Sarah awoke at 3 a.m., her heart pounding as if she had just escaped a nightmare. As she opened her eyes, a tall, dark figure stood right beside her bed. It had no eyes, no face, but she could feel it staring straight at her. She tried to scream, but her throat tightened. No sound escaped. Her body was frozen, as if an invisible force was pinning her down. The shadow drifted away, vanishing into the wall before Sarah could react. She gasped for breath and switched on the lights, but everything in the room remained unchanged. Yet the air was freezing, so cold she could see her breath in the dim light. After that night, the shadows appeared more often. Sarah would catch glimpses of them from the corner of her eye while cooking, watching TV, or brushing her teeth. One evening, while washing dishes, she heard a whisper right by her ear. The voice was indistinct, but it sent chills down her spine. She spun around. There was no one there. Terrified, Sarah confided in her best friend, Jake. A skeptic, Jake laughed and dismissed her fears. "You're just stressed. There's no such thing as shadow people." But that night, when Jake stayed over, he saw something. As he lay on the couch, an eerie heaviness filled the air. When he opened his eyes, he saw a shadow standing in the hallway, motionless. It was tall and indistinct, yet undeniably human-shaped. Jake blinked, and it was gone. The next morning, Jake looked pale and shaken. "Sarah, something is seriously wrong with your place." Sarah started researching the shadow people, and what she discovered unsettled her even more. Thousands of people around the world had reported seeing the same dark figures. Some believed they were interdimensional beings, while others thought they were lost souls, trapped between life and death. But all accounts shared one terrifying truth. Once you see them, they never leave. Sarah tried everything to ward them off. Lighting candles, hanging protective charms, reciting prayers, but nothing worked. They were not afraid of the light. They did not disappear when she prayed. They simply stood there, silently watching her. One night, as Sarah lay in bed scrolling through her phone, she glanced at the mirror across the room, and her blood ran cold. In the reflection, a dark figure stood behind her. She spun around. Nothing was there. She looked back at the mirror, and the shadow remained. From that night on, the shadows moved closer. At first, they lingered in the corners of her room. Then they stood at the foot of her bed. Then right beside her as she slept. One night, she woke up to find a shadow sitting on her chest, its empty face hovering inches from hers. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't scream. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing it to go away. When she finally dared to open them, it was gone. But the worst night was yet to come. One evening, as Sarah was drifting off to sleep, she heard a whisper right beside her ear. "Don't open your eyes." But instinct took over. She couldn't help herself. When she opened her eyes, she saw a shadow right in front of her. So close she could feel its icy presence. It leaned in closer, and for the briefest moment, she saw two glowing eyes in the darkness. And then, it was gone. After that night, Sarah never saw them again. But she never shook the feeling of being watched. She knew they were still there, hiding just out of sight, waiting for the right moment. Because once you've seen them, they never truly leave. They only hide in the dark, right behind you. It started as a faint vibration, an almost imperceptible hum that lingered in the silence of the night. At first, only a few people heard it. Strange reports from different corners of the world. A low-frequency droning sound, unlike anything natural, resonated through their homes, through their skulls, through their very bones. No one knew where it came from. No one knew how to stop it. Emma first noticed it one autumn night in Taos, New Mexico. Lying in bed, she felt an unsettling pressure in her ears, followed by an unrelenting, low-pitched hum. It wasn't loud, yet it was inescapable. She got up, checked the appliances, stepped outside to listen. The world was silent. No cars, no distant machinery, just the ever-present hum, pulsating deep within her head. She wasn't alone. The next morning, she mentioned it to her neighbor, an elderly man who had lived in Taos for decades. He stiffened and looked at her with wary eyes. "You've heard it now, haven't you?" he murmured. "Once you hear it, you can't unhear it." Emma scoured online forums and scientific reports, only to find scattered accounts of others who suffered the same fate. From the rolling hills of England to the remote towns of Canada, reports of the hum spanned continents. Yet no two descriptions were identical. Some heard a steady drone. Others described it as a throbbing pulse. Some felt vibrations through their skin, while others were driven to madness, their nights plagued by an unending torment that no earplugs could silence. Experts were baffled. Some blamed electrical grids, underground military tests, or the distant echoes of seismic activity. Others whispered of government conspiracies, secret sonic weapons, or something far more sinister. Something that lived beneath the earth, waking from its ancient slumber. Emma's nights became unbearable. The hum wasn't just a sound. It was a force pressing against her skull like an unseen weight. She found herself growing restless, her thoughts fraying, her sleep disturbed by fragmented dreams of something massive stirring beneath her town. The hum was getting louder. One night, unable to bear it any longer, she ventured to the outskirts of town where the noise seemed strongest. She wasn't alone. A group of people stood gathered in the dark, their eyes hollow, their expressions weary. They too had heard it, and they too had been drawn here to the source. The ground trembled, the hum deepened, and then, for the first time, the hum wasn't just a sound. It was a voice. The air grew dense as the vibrations turned into something more structured. Words, though not in any language Emma had ever heard. A deep, guttural resonance, like something ancient and inhuman, filled the air. The group froze, their breath stolen by an unseen force. Emma clutched her head as the pressure intensified, forcing her to her knees. Her vision blurred, but she could see the others experiencing the same agony. And then, the earth beneath them cracked. A fissure opened, and from within, something moved. It wasn't visible, not in the way one perceives physical shapes, but it was there. An immense presence shifting in and out of reality. The hum was not just a phenomenon. It was a call, and now something was answering. Emma struggled to back away as shadows poured from the opening, writhing like smoke, coiling around the legs of those gathered. Some screamed, others stood in silent horror as their bodies trembled, consumed by the sound. The hum reached its peak, reverberating through every fiber of their beings. Then, as suddenly as it had escalated, it stopped. The air was silent again. The fissure sealed itself, as if it had never been there. The gathered group stood motionless, their faces pale, their eyes void of expression. Emma gasped for breath, looking around frantically. The people around her turned one by one and walked away without a word, their movements stiff, mechanical. She tried to call out to them, but they did not respond. That night, Emma returned home, but sleep never came. She lay awake, listening to the silence, dreading the moment the hum would return. And when it did, because she knew it would, she feared she would not be the same person who had first heard it. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. Some sounds should never be answered. It began on a cold November night in 1966. In the small town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, something unnatural took flight in the darkness. It was first seen by two young couples driving through the abandoned TNT area, a remote, overgrown maze of concrete ruins left behind from World War II. What they saw that night would haunt them forever. A pair of glowing red eyes reflected in their headlights. A towering figure, at least 7 feet tall, emerged from the shadows. Its massive wings unfurled, stretching nearly 10 feet across, as it let out an unearthly shriek. The creature suddenly launched into the air, keeping pace with their speeding car, effortlessly gliding above them as they raced away in terror. The couples, Roger and Linda Scarberry, and Steve and Mary Millette, arrived breathless at the Point Pleasant police station. They told their unbelievable story to Deputy Millard Halstead, who knew them as respectable, level-headed individuals. Skeptical but intrigued, the officer followed them back to the TNT area. He found no trace of the creature, but the couples insisted that they were not mistaken. That was only the beginning. Over the next 13 months, more than 100 people reported seeing the creature. It always appeared at night, often near the TNT area or hovering over the Silver Bridge. Witnesses described the same thing. An enormous humanoid figure with glowing red eyes, its presence accompanied by an overwhelming sense of dread. Some people who encountered it suffered from strange symptoms afterward: burning eyes, unexplainable nightmares, and a deep feeling of foreboding. Mary Heyer, a local journalist, began covering the story as reports flooded in. She received visits from strange men in black suits, warning her to stop writing about the Mothman. These men, with their emotionless expressions and unsettling presence, only added to the growing paranoia in the town. John Keel, a journalist and paranormal investigator, arrived in Point Pleasant to document the sightings. As he interviewed witnesses, he found a disturbing pattern. Many of them reported receiving cryptic phone calls filled with eerie noises, static, and distorted voices. Some even claimed to hear strange messages warning of an impending disaster. The deeper Keel dug, the more surreal the story became. Some witnesses believed the Mothman wasn't acting alone. Reports of strange lights in the sky, UFO sightings, and encounters with enigmatic figures dressed in black surfaced alongside the Mothman encounters. Many began to speculate that the creature was not of this world, that it was either an alien entity or a harbinger of extraterrestrial forces watching over Point Pleasant. Then, on December 15, 1967, tragedy struck. The Silver Bridge, packed with holiday traffic, suddenly collapsed into the icy waters of the Ohio River. 46 people lost their lives. Witnesses later claimed they had seen the Mothman perched on the bridge in the days leading up to the disaster. Some believed it was a warning, an attempt to alert the town to the impending catastrophe. Others feared it was something far more sinister, an omen of death, or perhaps even the cause of the collapse itself. After the bridge collapse, sightings of the Mothman nearly ceased. The once terrified residents of Point Pleasant were left with unanswered questions. Was it a guardian or a harbinger of doom? A misunderstood entity trying to communicate, or something that thrived on chaos and destruction? Theories abound. Some believe the Mothman is an interdimensional being, slipping through the cracks of reality. Others think it is connected to UFO activity, as many unidentified flying objects were spotted in the area during the same time. Cryptozoologists suggest it could be an undiscovered species, an ancient creature forced from its habitat by human activity. One particularly chilling theory suggests that the Mothman is an entity that feeds off fear and tragedy, manifesting before disasters to absorb the psychic energy of the terrified. If true, this would mean that sightings of the Mothman are not warnings, but omens of something inevitable. In the years following the incident, the legend of the Mothman only grew. Books, documentaries, and movies cemented its place in American folklore. Point Pleasant even embraced the creature, erecting a statue in its honor and hosting an annual Mothman festival. But despite the commercialization, the fear lingers. Many skeptics dismissed the Mothman as mass hysteria, an elaborate hoax or misidentified wildlife, possibly a large owl or crane. However, the sheer number of reports, along with the eerie details surrounding them, make it difficult to completely dismiss the phenomenon. To this day, paranormal investigators continue to search for clues, combing through the forests and abandoned areas around Point Pleasant, hoping to capture definitive proof of the Mothman's existence. And then, there are the more recent sightings. In 2016, a man driving through Point Pleasant claimed to have photographed the creature once again. The blurry image showed a winged figure perched on a tree branch, its eyes glowing eerily in the dim light. Others have reported glimpses of a similar figure along remote highways, its glowing eyes watching them from the darkness before vanishing into the night. Some believe that the Mothman is drawn to places of impending disaster. Reports of similar creatures have surfaced in different parts of the world. In Germany, a creature known as the Freiburg Shrieker was seen shortly before a mine collapse in 1978. In 1999, People in Moscow reported sightings of a winged humanoid before the Russian apartment bombings. Could the Mothman be a universal omen of catastrophe, appearing only when tragedy is imminent? A truck driver passing through West Virginia in 2020 reported a terrifying encounter. While driving late at night on an empty stretch of road, his radio suddenly filled with static. The air became thick, suffocating. Then, in his headlights, he saw it. A tall, dark figure with piercing red eyes standing motionless on the road. He slammed on the brakes, but before he could react, the figure spread its massive wings and took off, disappearing into the black sky. The man refused to drive through that route again. Could the Mothman still be lurking, waiting for another disaster to strike? To this day, travelers on lonely roads sometimes swear they see two glowing red eyes staring back at them from the shadows. A rustling in the trees, a strange feeling of being watched, an inexplicable sense of doom. The Mothman has not been forgotten, and maybe, just maybe, it's still out there waiting for the next disaster, the next tragedy, the next time it needs to be seen. In the dim glow of flickering fluorescent lights, Lisa stepped into the elevator of her apartment building, heart pounding. She had spent hours researching the elevator game, a mysterious urban legend originating from Korea, rumored to transport players to another dimension. Despite her skepticism, a part of her yearned to experience something beyond the mundane. Clutching her phone, she took a deep breath and pressed the button for the 4th floor, initiating the ritual. The rules were simple yet unsettling. The player must enter an elevator alone, visit floors in a precise sequence, 4, 2, 6, 2, 10, and upon reaching the 5th floor, a mysterious woman might enter. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine as the elevator ascended. The air grew heavier, as if unseen eyes were watching. The doors slid open on the 4th floor, empty. She pressed the button for the 2nd floor, glancing at her reflection in the elevator's polished metal walls. She looked pale, her own eyes seeming more hollow than usual. As the elevator moved, an eerie static filled her ears, though her phone had no signal. The doors opened to the 2nd floor, revealing an identical empty hallway. Her fingers trembled as she continued, pressing the 6th floor. The elevator shuddered slightly, as if resisting. When it reached the 6th floor, she felt an unnatural silence press against her ears, suffocating and deep. The hallway was dark, as though the lights had been swallowed by shadows. Lisa swallowed hard and pressed the button for the 2nd floor again. The air thickened as she descended. Every movement, every second felt elongated. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her skin clammy. When the elevator arrived at the 2nd floor, the doors hesitated before opening. The hallway outside seemed different. The colors duller, the atmosphere heavier, like a faded memory of the real world. She hesitated but continued, pressing the button for the 10th floor. The elevator lurched upward, and Lisa's stomach twisted. Something was wrong. The air smelled faintly of burnt metal. The buttons flickered erratically, though she hadn't touched them. When the doors opened on the 10th floor, she was met with an unnatural crimson sky stretching endlessly above a lifeless cityscape. The building stood skeletal and abandoned, roads cracked as if untouched for centuries. Her instincts screamed at her to stay inside. The legend warned that those who stepped out might never return. But curiosity clawed at her. She stepped forward hesitantly, her foot hitting solid ground. The silence was absolute. Not even the wind moved. She turned to glance back at the elevator. Its doors remained open, beckoning her to return. A deep unease spread through her chest. A distant sound echoed, faint, rhythmic footsteps. Lisa spun around, scanning the emptiness. Then, from the far end of the street, a figure emerged. At first, it was nothing more than a silhouette, but as it neared, she saw it was a woman. The same woman the legend warned about. Her face was obscured by long, tangled hair, and she walked with an unnatural stiffness. A low whisper curled through the dead air, unintelligible but distinctly calling Lisa's name. Panic surged through her. She whirled back to the elevator, lunging toward the doors. The moment she stepped inside, she slammed the button for the first floor, her breaths ragged and uneven. The woman's footsteps quickened. Just as the doors began to close, Lisa saw her face, if it could be called a face. Hollow sockets where eyes should be, a mouth stretched too wide, revealing nothing but endless darkness. The doors shut. The elevator trembled violently as it descended, as if something was clawing at it from the outside. The lights flickered, the panel buttons flashing in a chaotic pattern. Her reflection in the metal walls distorted, her own face shifting, stretching, her eyes replaced by the void. Lisa shut her eyes, whispering desperate prayers. When the elevator finally stopped, she collapsed onto the floor, gasping. The doors slid open, revealing the familiar lobby of her apartment building. But something felt off. The atmosphere was thick, unnatural. The receptionist's desk was empty, and the usually bright lights seemed dimmer. Lisa stepped out cautiously. The lobby appeared identical to what she knew, yet something was undeniably wrong. She turned to look at the elevator. The floor indicator blinked erratically before stopping at an unfamiliar symbol. The doors remained open, leading to nothing but pitch-black emptiness. The rules said to never look back. Lisa forced herself to move forward, each step heavier than the last. Her phone vibrated violently in her pocket. She yanked it out, expecting to see a barrage of missed messages or calls. Instead, the screen was filled with static. Then, through the distortion, a single message appeared. "You shouldn't have left." A choked breath escaped her lips. The room spun. The elevator doors slammed shut behind her with a deafening finality. She wasn't sure if she had truly escaped, or if she had merely stepped into another version of reality, one where she would never truly be alone again. As she walked toward her apartment, each footstep echoing eerily in the silence, she noticed something strange. The hallway leading to her unit seemed longer than before, stretching endlessly into the dim distance. The doors to other apartments were all slightly ajar, their interiors shrouded in darkness. She could feel eyes on her, unseen figures peering through the cracks. Reaching her door, she fumbled with her keys, hands slick with sweat. As she pushed it open, she felt a presence behind her. Turning her head ever so slightly, she caught a glimpse of something standing at the far end of the hall. An elongated shadow, impossibly tall, shifting and twisting unnaturally. It whispered her name, the voice dry and brittle like crumbling paper. She shut the door and locked it, backing away. Her apartment seemed normal at first glance, but as she scanned the room, her breath caught. The framed photos on the wall had changed. The images of her friends and family were blurred, their faces smudged out as if something had erased their identities. And in the reflection of the darkened television screen, she saw her own face, expressionless, staring back at her with hollow, unblinking eyes. The game wasn't over. It had only just begun.